Hello. Um, Today is session 12 in the study of the book of Judges. Um, I am filming from home, obviously. Um, it's probably going to be one of the shorter studies, not because of not because of me, but because of content. It's a pretty straightforward chapter, and um, yesterday I had a lot of cold symptoms, and with everything going on, I did not go into the office just in case. Today, they're mostly gone, but I have a lot of fatigue, so um, I did not go in again. I do have some live stream courses that I'm going to be looking at later on this afternoon and early evening, so I'm kind of gearing myself for that. But I planned to tape this study yesterday to put it up today. The English needs to go up today, the Spanish will go up tomorrow, and so I will put off the Spanish one until tomorrow. But we're going to need to check into Judges. I might not be quite as animated as usual, and the Bible that I'm using is at the office because I figured when I left on Monday that I would just leave it there and it would be there on Tuesday for whenever. And then today I was hoping to go in and at least be able to bring it home with me when I was done there, and didn't make it. So I am using a different Bible, and because I only in this house have unpacked one of different translations, I do not have another NIV hard copy with me. Both of the unpacked ones are at my office right now. So I chose a totally different version to use for today, and it's the Contemporary English version, which means it's going to be very conversational. And actually, I think that'll be good for this story. So, chapter 7 of the book of Judges, let's meet up with Gideon. Chapter 6, when we first met Gideon, it began with him completely doubting himself. He was hiding like all Israelites were doing at the time because of the oppression of the Midianites and others, the Amalekites and others from the east of the Jordan. And when God first tells him, first of all, calls him mighty warrior, which he's like, what's that about? I'm hiding in a wine press threshing wheat. But through 3 tests, Gideon goes from being this scared Israelite threshing wheat in a wine press to being ready to lead an army against the enemy. The first test was basically just to make sure that, this is God who's talking to me, who's, it's like that it's not somebody on the other side trying to confuse me. And God's angel proved that he was of God. And then the last 2 tests were basically Gideon saying, okay, could you I need to make sure that you're calling me to lead the army into victory, and I need to make sure that you're calling me to be the hand that brings victory to our to the army against our enemies. And each one God asserts. And so at the end of chapter 6, Gideon is ready. He has become the valiant warrior because he now has faith in God. So we start 7 on an upswing. It's like, we can do this. We're going to do this. So let's start reading, and we're going to read verses 1 through 3 to begin. Early the next morning, Gideon and his army got up and moved their camp to Fear Spring, also known as Herod's Spring. The Midianite camp was to the north in the valley at the foot of the Moreh hill. And this is one of those times when I really would like my pictures, because I have actual pictures and maps showing where Moreh hill is compared to Mount Gilead, which is coming up soon. Verse 2, the Lord said, Gideon, your army is too big. I can't let you win with this many soldiers. The Israelites would think that they had won the battle all by themselves, and that I didn't have anything to do with it. So, call your troops together and tell them that anyone who is really afraid can leave Mount Gilead and go home. Yeah. 22,000 men returned home, leaving Gideon with only 10,000 soldiers. So apparently when he did his call up to the different tribes near the end of in chapter 6, he ended up with 32,000 soldiers. But I love it. It's like, whoever's really afraid, just go home. And it's like, okay, you don't have enough faith. If you're really afraid, just go. There's too many of you anyway. God wants to show his power. So they're left with only 10,000 men. Okay. Okay. We're okay. We're going to win with just 10,000 when we could have gone with 32,000. Okay. And let's read 4 through 8. Gideon, the Lord said, you still have too many soldiers. Take them down to the spring and I'll test them. I'll tell you which ones can go along with you and which ones must go back home. When Gideon led his army down to the spring, the Lord told him, watch how each man gets a drink of water. Then divide them into 2 groups, those who lap the water like a dog and those who kneel down to drink. 300 men scooped up water in their hands and lapped it, and the rest knelt to get a drink. The Lord said, Gideon, your army will be made up of everyone who lapped water from their hands. Send the others home. I'm going to rescue Israel by helping you and your army of 300 defeat the Midianites. Then Gideon gave these orders. You, 300 men, stay here. The rest of you may go home, but leave your food and trumpets with us. I'm going to stop there. Okay, so at the beginning, it's too many. And then with 32,000, too many. With 10,000, too many. And now we're down to 300. And here's the picturing this. Picture yourself at this brook. Now, personally, I would probably be one of those that knelt and scooped up the water and drank it like this. Also, keep in mind, soldiers, there's enemies nearby. There might be an ambush around. So keeping an eye out, but yeah. And then you have 300 who just kind of like lay down on the ground and get down to the water and just up right from the river. And they're like totally unaware of their surroundings. Either one of 2 things. Either those 300 are so confident in God or so clueless as what it means to be a good warrior. And all the other 9,700 that were carefully drinking were either not trusting enough of God or too much a warrior. And so God chooses the 300, and whether it doesn't tell us if they were the 300 worst warriors or they were the 300 most sure of God's presence and God's glory and God's leading in this. We don't know, but it was down to those 300 for whichever of those 2 reasons. And then when they left, all that Gideon asked was just leave your food and trumpets with us. Just leave everything with us. And that was kind of like in the middle of verse 8. So we'll finish verse 8 and go through 11. Gideon's army camp was on top of a hill overlooking the Midianite camp in the valley. That night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, attack the Midianite camp. I am going to let you defeat them. But if you're still afraid, you and your servant Purah should sneak down to the camp. When you hear what the Midianites are saying, you'll be brave enough to attack." God, knowing Gideon as well as he knows him, well enough to call him a mighty warrior, but he can still sense, especially now at 32,000 soldiers, Gideon was sure God has got this. And then 10,000, okay, with God we can. At 300 men left, maybe God is sensing a little doubt again in Gideon. How are 300 guys going to rout all these Midianites and Amalekites and others that are here with them? With 300, yeah, it's that uncertainty. And God knows that Gideon needs to be sure of God's presence for this upcoming battle. So he gives him an out. He gives him but if you're still afraid, sneak down there and listen to what they're saying. And when you hear what they're saying, you won't be afraid anymore. And so, continuing in verse 11, Gideon and Purah worked their way to the edge of the enemy camp where soldiers were on guard duty. Verse 12. The camp was huge. The Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern nations covered the valley like a swarm of locusts. And it would be easier to count the grains of sand on a beach than to count their camels. So this is a scary sight, a frightening sight. But Gideon overheard one enemy guard telling another, "I had a dream about a flat loaf of barley bread that came tumbling into our camp. It hit the headquarters tent, and the tent flipped over and fell down." The other soldier answered, "Your dream must have been about Gideon, the Israelite commander. It means God will let him and his army defeat the Midianite army and everyone else in our camp." As soon as Gideon heard about the dream and what it meant, he bowed down and praised God. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and shouted, "Let's go! The Lord is going to let us defeat the Midianite army." So he goes down there and he hears this. He hears the fear in the sentries, because they're on the edge, of the encampment. And now it's still nighttime. God woke him up at night, and they snuck down at night, and it is still night. But now it's probably getting near the end of night. But Gideon is now reassured. Even with 300, he knows that they don't know that. They are actually afraid, and they named him. They know my name. It's like God has gone before us. He has prepared the way. We will be victorious. And that assuredness seeps in. And when he commands those 300, they can hear the assuredness of Gideon knowing that God is with them and that the Lord is going to let us defeat them. And they are strengthened by it. Before we go into the battle, do you see yourself in any of this? Do you see yourself as Gideon when God calls you to something that seems impossible? And then maybe even after a little things, well, I've trained a little, I could maybe do this. And people come along with, it's like, okay, together we can do this. But then you're starting to leave God out of the equation because, okay, we can do this now. And then God has to remind you. It's like, maybe by somehow getting that help to not be there anymore, what you were depending on, what you were thinking you were going to have to enfrentar, to confront something. Sorry, yeah, my Spanish, when I'm tired, Spanglish goes on in my head. And so sometimes God recognizes it, and sometimes he has to reassure us that maybe this study is a reassurance for you, that God has called you for something, and that it seems impossible, that it seems that it makes no sense that you will be victorious in it. But if God is calling you to it, and if God has prepared the way for you, place your faith in God, not in others, not even in yourself, but in God, and step forward. Because here's the battle. Here's the outcome of 301, Gideon, and 300 men routing a sea. It's like, I really wish I had a picture. I'll have to pull it up when we do the next chapter so that at least you can see pictures afterwards. The valley is extensive, and the space between Mount Moreh and Mount Gilead is wide. There's plenty of room for a lot of people and a lot of camels. But these 300 men, led by Gideon, who is now fully assured of God being there and going to do this with them, do this for them. God is going to let us defeat them. Verse 16. Gideon divided his little army into 3 groups of 100 men, and he gave each soldier a trumpet and a large clay jar with a burning torch inside. Gideon said, "When we get to the enemy camp, spread out and surround it. Then wait for me to blow a signal on my trumpet. As soon as you hear it, blow your trumpet and shout, 'Fight for the Lord! Fight for Gideon!'" Gideon and his group reached the edge of the enemy camp a few hours after dark, just after the new guards had come on duty. Gideon and his soldiers blew their trumpets and smashed the clay jars that were hiding the torches. The rest of Gideon's soldiers blew the trumpets they were holding and in their right hands, and they smashed the jars and held the burning torches in their left hands. Everyone shouted, "Fight with your swords for the Lord and for Gideon." Stop there. This is imagine. It's okay. We now have a better timeline. And the timeline is telling us it's the middle of the night. It's like you got everyone's basically sound asleep except for the guards on duty. And all of a sudden you hear this racket of trumpets, and then just after that you hear these crash, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by these torches. Excuse me. Now, we'll have you know that remember when Gideon told the 9,700 to leave, but leave their food and trumpets with them? Usually, trumpets were used as a call to a certain number of soldiers. And if we want to do math, you figure there were 10,000 soldiers, and you end up with 300 torches because everyone has a trumpet. And so maybe that's certain number of certain hundreds. Each trumpet was to rally a certain number of hundreds of soldiers, and also the torch. There's a whole study on this, how many men each torch represented, and so it gave the illusion to the Midianites, a false illusion, that there were a lot more Israelites out there in the darkness. They'd woken up, awake like this with this noise, and then you see the lights, and in the confusion, in the confusion of not knowing what's going on, and that underlying, it's Gideon. They know his name. And when they hear the shouts, fight with your swords for the Lord and for Gideon, they know this is that army. And maybe they had some scouts who had seen the original 32,000. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating. Yeah, I can't move that much. Sorry. Yeah, dizzy. So maybe, yeah, this is going on, and in their minds and everything, there's fear. God has placed fear in them. Verse 21. The enemy soldiers started yelling and tried to run away. Gideon's troops stayed in their positions surrounding the camp and blew their trumpets again. As they did, the Lord made the enemy soldiers pull out their swords and start fighting each other. The enemy army tried to escape from the camp. They ran to Acacia Tree Town toward Zeradah, and as far as the edge of the land that belonged to the town of Abel Meholah near Tabath. So Gideon's group hasn't even fought. They're standing there blowing the trumpets, and every time they blow the trumpets, this sea of men fear. They truthfully, they don't know each other. There are Midianites there and Amalekites there and people from other eastern nations. So they don't all know each other. And in the confusion, I think God used that against them. He confused them enough that they started killing each other, fighting each other. And Gideon's crowd is still up on the mountain, and they're acting like they've been attacked rather than just woken up with noise and torches. And they start fighting each other, and then they try to escape from the camp, and they run trying to get away as far as they can. At this point, that fear that God used in the enemy, at this point, Gideon, verse 23, sent word for more Israelite soldiers to come from tribes of Naphtali, Asher, and both halves of Manasseh to help fight the Midianites. He also sent messengers to tell all the men who lived in the hill country of Ephraim, come and help us fight the Midianites. Put guards at every spring, stream, and well as far as Beth-Bahra before the Midianites can get to them, and guard the Jordan River. Troops from Ephraim did exactly what Gideon had asked, and they even helped chase the Midianites on the east side of the Jordan River. These troops captured Raven and Wolf, the Midianite leaders. They killed Raven, whose, this is translation, his name was Oreb, at a large rock that has come to be known as Oreb Rock or Raven Rock. And they killed Wolf, whose actual name is Zeb, near a wine pit that has come to be called Wolf Wine Pit or Zeb Wine Pit. And that's the end of chapter 7. After they've gone running, now 300 men cannot keep up with and capture all of these people, but they have been defeated. They are trying to escape. They've fought and killed their own people in camp and then gone wild. Now the God has proved himself. He has done it. Now it's time to get reinforcements to help the cleanup. And that's what happens. These probably many of them were of the original 31,700. But who were ready, and now that it's been run, it's like, oh, they're not as afraid anymore because now they see the enemy is the fearful one. And Gideon wants to keep the enemies from water. It's like you can't last long, you can't hide long enough without water. And so it's like guard all the water, guard the springs, the streams, the wells, the Jordan River crossing, anything. He's like, guard them. He asked Ephraim with Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh. They're out helping corral and capture the enemy, and kill the enemy. And that, and of course Ephraim manages to get some guys on the other side of the Jordan, people who hadn't even come across yet, the other side, and killed two of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb, whose names translate to raven and wolf. I told you this is a very simple translation. It's very direct. They don't use the actual ancient word names. But so they have won. They have these. They have routed the enemy. They have captured and killed two of the leaders. It's like we're doing really well here, with 300 men and then some reinforcements to do some of the cleanup. God has proven. God has come to the rescue. God has used Gideon to do the seemingly impossible. God calls you. Sometimes to do the seemingly impossible. But if he calls you, he will equip you. He is with you. Put your faith in him. Take a step. Go for it. Listen. Listen. He is with you. Next study, we will be looking at the last chapter about Gideon, chapter 8 of the book of Judges, and I invite you to read ahead. Read 6, 7, and 8 again, just to really get the whole flow of the story. And we will meet again in a few days for session 13. This is session 12. And I will try and have my pictures for you so you can see, visualize a little bit. Or you can Google the name, Mount Gilead, Mount Moreh, Mount Gilead. And actually, I'll give you a hint. You can see them from Mount Carmel very clearly, actually. And so I'll see you next time. God bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Amen.